What is up, fellow summoners? Welcome to the channel today. Thanks for coming by for another first look video. And I think of all the series that I do, I think my first look videos are probably, I think they're probably my favorite because there's just a lot of excitement and anticipation that surrounds these videos, just kind of waiting to see when they're going to come out. Finally getting our hands on these new character abilities. And this video is a little bit different than the videos that I did for King Groot, Angela, Nebula, and Yondu, in the fact that we only have the ability list for these characters right now and the actual percentages that we'll see in game, but we don't actually have any gameplay footage, unfortunately. So I think I've got a fairly good grasp on both of these characters. Just reading through their ability list, there are a few things here and there that I really will need to wait until I see gameplay footage, but I think we've got more than enough information here to kind of dig into it and to hopefully give you a fairly good understanding, at least from my perspective and my opinion, on how these characters are going to be used and how you'll see kind of their rotation being used in the game. So let me go ahead and play this video. I'm going to let it play up into the point where we actually get to the attributes of Punisher here, and there's a couple things that I wanted to point out. So first off, let me pause it right here. There we go. I want to see the percentages. Okay, so his armor rating and his block proficiency, those look fairly unspectacular, but if you actually compare those up against several other characters, you'll see that that is actually, those are actually really good percentages. Rhino's armor rating is 18%, Classic Captain America is 9%, Civil Warrior is 14%, and Hulkbuster is 16%. Now, I realize that all of those characters have either armor up abilities, armor up buffs, or some sort of a signature ability that increases their armor rating and block proficiencies. But still, that is, as you can see, that 24% is still quite a bit higher than all of those characters and a very solid number for a base armor rating. And his block proficiency is 69%. Basically, of those three characters, the only one that's higher in block proficiency is Classic Cap, and he's at 75%. Rhino's at 56, Civil Warrior's at 68, so fairly similar there to Civil Warrior, and Hulkbuster's at 54. So just something that I wanted to point out, just to kind of give an idea of where he was going to fall at as far as damage. He looks kind of he's a smaller framed character, so sometimes I'm just not sure where they're going to fall at there, but you'll see as we kind of dig into this. He very much is a kind of Swiss Army knife. He's packed with a lot of utility, and usually when we see that, we find a character that does have fairly decent armor and block proficiency ratings, and then typically a character that also has a little bit lower crit rating and crit damage rating. And that is to kind of balance the character out. They want to give them a lot of utility and a lot of usefulness, but not overdo it by also giving them a lot of damage. So if you look at that crit rating and the crit damage rating at 21% and 174%, that is quite a bit lower than, let's say, like another tech character like Rocket Raccoon. His crit rate is just shy of 30%. It's at 29.9. His crit damage rating is 214%, so that's quite a bit higher there. Even Iron Man in the same tech class as well. Crit ratings at 22.6%. Critical damage rating at 177. So you can see there, those numbers aren't terrible from him, but he is definitely on the lower end, even in the tech class, as far as pure damage dealing when it comes to crit rate and to critical damage rating. Okay, so now that we've gotten through all that boring stuff, let me go ahead and play the video here, and we'll move forward into the synergy. No, not synergies. Let me get through the special attacks here. Won't bother reading any of this. And any moments. Here we go. So I find these synergy bonuses incredibly interesting. If you just take them at their face value, they're actually really strong. He's got bonuses with the Classic Punisher, Classic Cap, and then Thor. But what I also find interesting is the fact that, these are not synergies that are going to pair with anybody else on your team. So if you fill a spot, basically, let's say you bring in, you've got your Punisher 2099, and you've got your Classic Punisher to begin the fight with, an increased power meter. There's no synergy that's going to then pair up with, let's say, the Wolverine and I don't know, just pick any characters you want. Those synergies are not going to benefit those other characters in any other way. So in one sense, while these are really, really strong, in another sense, when it comes to like 5-man teams for special events and for chapter exploration, story exploration, you know, those synergies aren't going to carry across the board. So just something to keep in mind. Outside of that, though, if you're looking at 3-man teams, you know, AQ, AW, these are very, very strong synergies. Unfortunately, Classic Punisher, you know, he's not really a character you're going to want to bring in to either AQ or AW. However, the final two that we see here in Classic Cap and Thor, Classic Cap has got, actually I went too far, let me scroll back up here just a hair, there we go. So with Classic Cap, you've got the Loyal Minister begin the fight with 15% additional battery charge. Which if you add that on top of the fact he starts with 25%, plus if he's awakened, he has another 15%, so you can actually start the fight with 55% battery charge if you're running with Classic Cap. But then Classic Cap himself, 15% attack while the opponent is fatigued or stunned, which is actually pretty good because, you know, most of the time, if you're pairing, you're going to end up putting one of those fatigues with Classic Cap. And then Thor, obviously, if you are still using Thor in AW or AQ, he's just going to be hitting harder now. So, you know, Classic Punisher probably still doesn't have a great spot in the game. But as far as Classic Cap and Thor, while they're not used nearly as often, I think, as they once were in the game, still very solid champs. Would make a very good 3-man roster in Classic Cap, Thor, and Punisher 99, running them into AQ or AW, depending upon which lane you're going to run. Really cool synergy bonuses. I'll be interested to see if this is kind of a test. If they're just kind of throwing this in there to see how the community reacts to it, how the community uses it. Because again, these synergy bonuses aren't going to help any of your other newer characters that you're running into AQ. You know, if you picked up Yondu, this isn't going to help him. If you've picked up Nebula, this isn't going to help her. So the synergy bonuses are linked only directly to these very specific characters. So I'll be interested to see what you guys think of this and how people actually use this, if they will change up the teams they bring into AQ for 3-man rosters. Okay, let me move forward now into the Awakened ability. And the Awakened ability I really, really like. This Retribution 2099, I mentioned it a second ago, but when he is awakened, he will start the fight with a 15% charge in his Nanotech battery, which again, that is on top of, if you drop a few lines down here where it talks about Nanotech charging, the very first line, the Nanotech battery begins the fight with 25% of the max charge. This goes from 0 all the way up to 100. It shows as a percent. Just think of it as, well, I was going to say like you're charging a battery. That's exactly what it is. You've got a battery. I don't know what the icon's going to look like, if it's going to have its own little power meter or how it's going to work. It'll probably be something very similar to what we see with like Dormammu, with that kind of circle buff there that stacks up to 100. I think it's a dimensional link. Or maybe what's something else we see stack, like Black Panther Civil Warrior with his reflective armor, how the buff stacks up. This will be something very similar to that. You'll have some sort of a battery buff, and then you start the fight with it at 25%. If you are awakened, it's an additional 15% on top of that. So right as soon as you get into the game, if he's awakened, you're going to be starting with 40%. If you're running with, what was it, Classic Cap, it's another 15% on top of that. But again, that's a very specific synergy. So that's the first part of the Awakened ability. The second part is, and this is probably the most important part, is whenever the opponent, once opponents hit their max power, it's going to drain 50% of your battery. It's going to drain 5% of their opponent's power, and then power lock them for 8.5 seconds, which is really cool, because immediately the first thing I thought of here is freaking Hyperion on the right side of the map. As you move up, I can't remember what node it is. I'll show a picture here, but as you move up, back up into the middle mini-boss there on that power gain node, that is almost always either a magic or almost always now, I should say it was almost always a magic before, but seems like it's moving more and more towards Hyperion because he always gets an S3 there. And having Punisher here, 2099, the ability to not have to worry about pushing him into an S3. You know, at the very least here, if you push him into an S3, it's going to dial back that by 5%. You're going to power lock him for 8.5 seconds. So basically, you've got, you got 8.5 seconds there to try to bait out that S3 because he doesn't actually have any sort of a power lock. But on top of that, I'm going to let this thing scroll all the way down here. Another thing you can do, and I'll be jumping around all over the place here, but his special attack 3, if you read it here, it says 50% of the battery is drained to disintegrate the opponent, dealing direct damage over 10 seconds and reducing the power gain by 90%. So you could almost you could almost pair these two things, and it would be a little bit difficult unless you have very close to 100% of your battery accessible to you. But if you push Hyperion or push any character into an S3, if you are unable to bait out that special within 8.5 seconds when they're power locked, you theoretically, if you had 3 bars of power, you could hit your S3, you could do the direct damage, and then also when you came out of that S3, you would have reduced power gain rate by 90% for an additional 10 seconds. So in total, if you were able to pair both of those things together, and again, this is all very much in theory because we haven't seen gameplay, haven't actually played with a character, but in theory, if you take the 8.5 second power lock plus the 10 seconds of the 90% reduced power gain, you've got almost 20 seconds there where you can bait out the special, which I find really, really intriguing. So I know I jumped all over the place. Let me try to back up here a little bit. Where was I at? Haven't even gotten through the signature ability yet. I may have to break these videos up depending upon how long this is. But okay, so the nanotech charging mentioned already. So it begins the fight with 25%, and then every 5 seconds your battery starts to charge passively, and it's kind of the reverse of what you would expect it to be. The more buffs that the enemy has, and I'm sorry, I think I just spit on the mic there. The more buffs that the enemy has, the less charge that you're going to be receiving every 5 seconds. Which, I guess in my mind, I would think the more buffs that the enemy has, the more I should recharge to counteract that. But I guess what they're trying to do here is that the weakness of the tech class is Cosmic Champs, and many of the Cosmic Champs have a lot of buffs that they build up quickly. Specifically Angela's the one I'm thinking about right off the top of my head, but you've got Hyperion, you've got Black Bolt, I'm sure there's many other there that I'm missing, but the majority of the Cosmic class has a lot of buffs that they build up. So I think that this is somewhat of kind of playing to the fact that they are weak against Cosmic Champs. I think that is the flavor that they're going for here. So what you're trying to do, and you don't really have any ability to control necessarily, now that I'm thinking about it, you can't really control the buffs the enemy are getting. It's just something that's going to happen throughout the fight. So again, I think they're playing to the fact that they're weak against Cosmic Champs. So every 5 seconds your battery is charging. So let's get into the Nanotech Effects. So there's so much stuff here that you're going to have to memorize, and it's just going to take a lot of gameplay before you really perfect this character. But one of the coolest features here, and I'm not sure that we've ever seen a passive heal block like this before, but once an enemy on the first line here, once the opponent activates a regen buff, it's going to drain 20% of your power, but instantly block the target for 8 seconds. And additionally to that, and more importantly, is if the debuff, if that 8 seconds falls off and the opponent is still regenning or has a new regen that they're in the middle of, that heal block is going to instantly activate itself again for an additional 8 seconds, and it's just going to keep this up for the entire fight as long as there's a regen going. Which I'm trying to think of. We instantly think of Realm of Legends with Wolverine, but really at this point in the game, most people have done that already. This is not really, technically, yes, it would be an answer to that, but I'm trying to think of any other more useful spots and useful characters to use this against. Wolverine and X-23, we don't see a whole lot of on defense in Alliance Wars. Cable is a character we see more and more of. He's got a regen that this would negate. Hyperion's got a regen this would negate. Even Mordo if you push him into his S3. So while this isn't something that we'll probably see a lot of, it's definitely a big plus in my book. Having the fact that whenever a regen pops up, you don't have to worry about it. Don't worry about trying to time pushing Ultron. down to his 50% and proccing the regen, and then again at 25%, because as long as you've got 20% of your battery there to go, it's going to drain that and automatically heal block, which I think is a really, really cool, unique thing we've not seen in the game before. The next effect is Punisher. Once he drops below 10% health, the battery is drained entirely, allowing Punisher to regenerate 59.75 health over 10 seconds for each percent drained. Now, I initially assumed that this was going to work just like an Iron Man regen does, where once you get down to, you know, a certain percentage of Iron Man's health and he kicks in his regen, you can no longer go back down to that percentage and have it kick back in. I don't know if that is how this is going to work, you know, because depending upon where you're at, once you get to 10% health, that regen could be really small. Like, let's say that I don't know, you just used a heal block, so it drained 20%, and you just used a heavy attack, which if you look down here, it does drain 15%, but stuns for a second and a half. So maybe you've only got like 20% power left. You know, that heal is not going to be very strong. And I'm curious to see if they don't actually allow you to proc that multiple times in a game every time you get to 10% health. I don't know. I mean, I have no reason to believe that it does, other than the fact that his regen potentially could be really crap, you know, if you're only able to get a very small regen off that. So, again, that's one of the things I mentioned at the beginning. We just won't know until we actually see the gameplay footage. But I guess that's just kind of a theory and something I want to throw out there to see if I'm correct once the gameplay comes in. And then the next Nanotech Effect is the one I just mentioned there with a heavy attack. You've got a 15% drain, stuns for 1.5 seconds, which I was trying to figure out, like, that seems like a really arbitrary, random thing for him to do. I mean, a 1.5 second stun is not really that long. It's not like he has a hold down effect to try to charge something. The only thing that I could come up with, and let me scroll down here a little bit, let me get to the overdrive. So once he gets to 100% of his battery, he goes into overdrive, and it immediately starts to diminish itself until it gets to 0. And then you gain an increase to your attack power for every percentage that you have. So as soon as it starts draining, you have the most attack. As the battery drains lower and lower, you lose that attack power as the battery drains lower. So what I think is going on here is, if you get to a point where you do not want to push yourself into overdrive, so maybe you're trying to hold out and wait, you're really close to 10% health, you want to make sure that you get the max amount of regen possible. You know, the only way that you can control that, because passively you're gaining you're gaining a charge every 5 seconds. The only way to passively dump that through an action is with a heavy attack. So I think that that's what's going on there. If I had to guess, that I think that is your button, that's your ability, whatever you want to call it. That is your way to control yourself and keeping yourself from going into overdrive. So again, overdrive, you can see it there. The other thing I didn't mention is that while you are in overdrive, opponents are gaining 90% less power. So again, this is really, really interesting because, you know, if you do manage to push the enemy, and I can't remember how much it drains. Let me go back up here. Would his signature ability stack? No. Yeah, see, no, those two things aren't going to stack, because if you're awakened, the opponent's max power meter, you're going to drain 50% of your battery to power lock them for 8.5 seconds. So you wouldn't have enough time to then get back up to 100% to get into overdrive to take advantage of that 90% decrease to the power gain. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm all over the place. There's so much to cover with this character, and my mind is just coming up with more and more things as we go along here. So let's move down here into the Special Attack 1. So Special Attack 1, the Punisher momentarily switches his battery into overcharge mode, gaining 16% charge over 8 seconds. So this is kind of the reverse of the heavy attack that we saw. The heavy attack, it drains 15% of your power. Special Attack 1 gains 16% of your power. Outside of that, I wouldn't expect this to do a lot of damage. It's basically just a way to control and push yourself. You know, if you're getting close to death, you're getting close to that 10%, you know, maybe fire off as many S1s as you can to get yourself as close to 100% when that thing's going to kick in for the maximum amount of regen. Then Special Attack 2. Each round that is fired drains 20% of your battery to activate auto-targeting. Auto-targeting is pretty cool. There are no passive evades. It won't trigger passive evade, so if you're fighting against Nightcrawler, not only are you going to have class advantage, but now, you know, as long as you have at least 20% battery every time this thing fires off, he's not going to be able to evade that. Also, there's going to be an additional critical rating for each one of those as well. And then finally, and I haven't seen the S2, I don't know if it's out floating around somewhere, but it looks like he'll probably finish off after he fires a couple times with his what has he got, like handguns. He'll finish it off with a grenade launcher, 100% chance to armor break, which that armor break does look fairly strong. Again, this is a 5-star maxed out character, so we'll just have to wait and see what those numbers are with 4-star characters. But the armor break is for 10 seconds, and if the battery has at least 10% of the charge left, after you've gotten through all the handgun firing there, if you have at least 10% of the charge left, it's going to double that duration all the way up to 20 seconds. So then we'll move all the way down to the S3, which I mentioned a little bit before, but the S3 does drain 50% of the power. To push it's called Disintegrate on the opponent. This deals direct damage. Again, these numbers are for 5-star characters. Takes place over 10 seconds. So not a real heavy tick. It's kind of drawn out there over 10 seconds, but it also, again, reduces their power gain by 90%, which is very, very strong. Whew, Lord, that was a lot of stuff to get through. Let me take a quick look here where we're at. Okay, yeah, I'm at 21 minutes. I think I'm going to cut this one. I don't want this video to go on too long, but I will sit here and also work on the Carnage video and get that one out as well. Okay, guys, I would love to hear your feedback on this character. Personally, I don't know how I feel. When I saw the character, I thought that he looked very offensive based. Like I mean, he looks like a really cool character. But I think that they've actually gone the route of giving him a more utility base. This is almost like a Mystic Champ in some ways. He's got a lot of a Mystic Champ kind of flavor, being able to reduce power gain and to have a regen and to have a heal block and all these things. Feels very much like a Mystic Champ kind of rolled into the tech class. So I think he's going to be a strong character. Could see him being used in Alliance War because of that heal block. I think he's going to be a really strong character because he cannot be pushed into an S3 as long as he's awakened. You don't have to worry about that right away. Again, I think he's going to be a good Alliance War character. Is he going to take the spot of some of the more sought-after characters in the game when it comes to AQ? I don't know about that, but only time will tell. I think the biggest thing about him is that heal block, and I think if that regen procs more than once, he'll be more useful, but definitely that heal block I can see being very useful in special case, special events that we see come into the game. Alright, I'm going to stop blabbing on here, give you guys a chance to leave some comments below. Let me know what you think. Let me know your hype level and anything else you want to leave. Alright, until I see you in the next video, and I will get working on Carnage tonight. I'll get that one up shortly tomorrow, Friday at some point for you guys. Alright, thanks for tuning in. Take care, guys. We'll see you in the next one.